This story begins about 12 years ago when my son moved to Michigan. He and a friend got job interviews at an auto plant, both secured the job, and they rented an apartment together. Eventually, his friend got married, and my son lived alone. He was always quiet around us, and we were surprised when his friends described him as fun. In high school, he dated many girls but never stayed with anyone for long and rarely talked about them. This is why my wife, Catherine, and I were surprised when he called to say he was bringing a girl home for us to meet. She was beautiful, 22, and very friendly. We could see what our son, Mark, saw in her. We learned her dad was Mexican and her mom Slavic. They met at the Mexican restaurant where she worked and had been dating for a few months. We had no idea. We were so happy for them, they seemed very happy together. About 3 months later, Mark called to say they were getting married. We asked if she was pregnant, and he said no, they were just in love. We went to Michigan for their wedding shower and met her family. They were wonderful people and made us feel incredibly welcome. Our whole family attended the wedding, and everyone commented on what a wonderful couple they made. If there was any negative point, it was that she was so pretty, she might be high maintenance. Life went on fine for all of us. We visited them a couple of times a year, and they visited us. It did bother us that they were both materialistic. They had to buy a house, each leased a new car, and wanted everything new. I guess it was just their generation. About a year and a half after they married, Sarah became pregnant. We were happy for them, but her parents were ecstatic, as this would be their first grandchild. We already had 3 from our daughters. When it was time for the delivery, Mark called us, and we went up the next morning. They had a beautiful baby girl named Maria. Everyone was so happy for them. We stayed in town for a few days to help however we could. We wondered what kind of dad our son would be, and he turned out to be great. Sarah breastfed the baby or left breast milk for her when she went to work. We bought her the pump. Our son had no problems feeding, changing, or being up with the baby. We were so proud of him. Life went on normally with regular visits until Maria was around 4 years old. We received a call from Mark saying he was taking a couple of days off work and coming home. He told us that Sarah was pregnant again, and she told him it probably wasn't his. We were devastated. Every parent loves their kids no matter their age, and you always want to help them. When Mark came home, he told us what happened. I got home from work and noticed Sarah was pacing around, looking very nervous. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me she had just taken a pregnancy test and it was positive. I reassured her that it was fine and that we would handle it together. That's when she dropped the bombshell. She was pretty sure the baby wasn't mine. I got furious and demanded to know what she was saying. She confessed she was having an affair with a man at work and had the gall to say she felt they were soulmates. I had to get out of the house before I lost control. I told her I was leaving for a few days and that we'd deal with it when I got back. My mind was in chaos. Mark's best friend, who was going through a divorce, took him out that night, probably to drink. He didn't come home that night, but when he returned the next morning, we asked him what his immediate plans were. He said he was going to ask Sarah to move out. He wasn't sure what else to do in the short term. Her mother babysat Maria while they both worked. Mark called Sarah from our house and told her he wanted her out within the month. We spoke to him the following week. He was still unsure about his plans. We were surprised to learn that the man Sarah was having an affair with was 9 years younger than her and of Mexican descent. Like most kids, Mark didn't listen to us. Sarah did move out and into an apartment. Our son still gave her $100 a week for Maria's support. Sarah's mom was devastated by the news, and her dad, Hector, stopped talking to her. They all loved Mark and couldn't believe Sarah could be so foolish. We believed they thought Mark had somehow contributed to the divorce but never pressed the issue. Mark told us he decided not to file for divorce until after the baby was born. Sarah and the baby would both be covered under Mark's insurance, which would be expensive otherwise. He was worried that if the child was his, he might get stuck with the bills. Mark and Sarah only communicated about Maria. Christine, Sarah's mother, often acted as the intermediary. Mark said Christine cried many times over the breakdown of their marriage. She actually hoped they might work things out and get back together. We heard that Ray, the possible father of the child, quit his job at the restaurant and went back to Mexico for a while until things cooled down. It was probably a smart move. When it was time for the baby's birth, we asked Mark if he went to the hospital, as he had been very involved during Maria's birth and had been the proud dad in the delivery room. He told us he went to work. Sarah's mom was the only one present during the delivery. After work, Mark went to see the baby. When he saw that the baby boy was definitely darker, he looked at Christine with tears in his eyes, told the nurse not to list him as the father, and left the hospital without speaking to Sarah. The next day, he saw a lawyer and began divorce proceedings. We heard Ray was back in town, but Mark never mentioned if he had seen him. Mark had to give Sarah half their net worth and $125 a week in support for Maria. They had joint custody of Maria. Mark didn't want to fight, he just wanted to ensure his daughter was well taken care of. He took out another loan to pay Sarah her share but kept the house and most of its contents. Over the last couple of years, he visited us frequently and always brought Maria. She adored her grandmother, my wife, who is a very caring person. They did everything together, shopping, playing games, riding bikes, and more. Maria often cried when she had to go home, but my wife reassured her they would see each other again soon. Mark even bought Maria a cell phone, so she calls her grandmother every week. I haven't spoken to Sarah since we found out about her cheating. When she calls to talk to Mark or Maria during their visits, I just hand them the phone. I can't forgive her for what she did to my son and his marriage. Our whole family dislikes her now. Mark is a very private person and rarely shares details with us, even when asked. One day, Maria called to tell us her mom and Ray got married and named the baby boy Ray Jr. Maria calls her half-brother Little Ray and her stepfather Ray, never Dad. Mark seems to just go along, never sharing much. He says his life revolves around work, taking care of Maria, and going to the bar with friends when Maria is with her mom. He never mentions any women except his friends. I believe he still loved Sarah and might have considered taking her back if the baby had been his. His ex-in-laws still love him. In fact, his ex-father-in-law and one of Sarah's uncles are on the same bowling team as Mark. It's a strange situation. They wanted to stay in touch with us, but it's too much for us. We can't accept that their daughter ruined so many lives. We send a Christmas card each year, but that's about it. I've seen Sarah through our son's window when she drops off Maria occasionally when we're there. I can't bring myself to even say hi to her. One day, when we visited Mark and Maria, there was a little boy there. Maria told us it was her brother Ray, who was 3 at the time. Christine, who usually watches him, had an emergency, and Mark offered to take care of him for a few hours until Sarah got off work. Mark said he didn't hold any ill will toward the kid. It wasn't his fault his mom was unfaithful. We all went to an Italian restaurant, and Mark ordered Little Ray spaghetti. The little guy was chubby but cute. Mark mentioned that he has Ray over to play with his sister occasionally. The boy seemed to listen to Mark but kept calling him Dad because he heard Maria say it and just repeated it. Ray, I'm not your dad. You call me Mark, okay? Mark must have repeated that sentence 5 times while we were at the restaurant. Life went on, but in the back of my mind, I always wished Sarah hadn't gotten off so easy for what she did to my son. We told Mark that we didn't think her new marriage would last, given she thought they were soulmates and he was 9 years younger. It wouldn't be long before he started looking for younger pastures. I make small deliveries for a company, and they asked if I was going to Michigan soon. I told them I could go anytime and could stop to see my son and granddaughter. I also had other family there. The following Saturday, I made the delivery and stopped by my son's place to take him out to lunch. He told me he had to work that afternoon. They were working 7 days a week, and he needed all the hours he could get. Times were tough, and he was cut back to 35 hours a week, falling behind on his bills. I knew this because his mom was sending him money, actually paying a couple of his bills directly to ensure they got paid. His ex wouldn't settle for less money, even though he was falling behind on other payments. In fact, she asked for more, but the court didn't grant her any extra when they saw what he was already paying. He bought almost all of Maria's clothes and carried the insurance for her. Sarah enrolled Maria in dance classes and sent the bills to Mark. I almost called him a wimp until he told me he would do anything for his daughter. She was his life, and I could understand that, having 3 kids of my own. There is nothing I wouldn't do for my kids at any age. When I arrived at his house, he told me Maria was spending the night at her grandmother's house. She was also watching little Ray since Sarah was going out with friends and her husband was visiting his sister in Indiana for the weekend. Mark said I could spend the night at his house, but he had to go to work. I told him I would catch a cheap motel up the road and spend the night there. I hugged my son and wished him the best, telling him I'd always be there if he needed someone to talk to. I drove about 40 miles and found a motel near a shopping center. I figured I could take in a movie and maybe stroll through the mall. At the desk, I checked in and, with a common name like Johnson, decided to pay with cash. While I was in my room cleaning up, I overheard a man and woman talking just outside my window. As I looked out, I saw a black man and a white woman. Normally, this wouldn't bother me, but this time it was different. It was my ex-daughter-in-law. What the hell was going on? We were a good 50 miles from where she lived. I remembered my son mentioning that her husband, Ray, was gone for the weekend and she was going out with friends. Was this black guy the friend? I doubted anyone in her family knew about this date, especially her dad, who didn't like black people. Before Mark met her, a black guy had tried to get her to go out with him, and her dad put a stop to it. I heard her say, "Let me get out of my work clothes, and you can take me to the Olive Garden like you promised." He smiled, and they headed into the room next to mine. I was sure it was her. She wore a shirt with the emblem of the restaurant she worked at and a pair of tight-fitting shorts. They were too tight for a married woman her age, but she still had quite the body and wasn't afraid to show it. They came out about 15 minutes later, got in his car, and headed off. My mind started to wander. Maybe I had watched too many spy shows. I wasn't a secret agent, but I was foolish enough to act like one. I figured I had about 2 hours to set up a plan. Finally, I might get a little revenge on my ex-daughter-in-law who ruined my son's life. I headed across the street to an electronics store and asked the salesman if they carried any kind of surveillance equipment. He smiled and took me to a part of the store loaded with everything for surveillance. I explained that I wanted a tiny camera that could be hidden easily and work with a remote control recorder. He smiled again and told me surveillance equipment sold like hotcakes. It cost me $300. I'd have to explain the bill to my wife when it came. She always yelled at me for buying more electronic equipment. The salesman told me he hoped I caught the culprit I was looking for. I had mentioned that someone was stealing things from my office and that I needed something that would work within 100 feet through closed doors and walls. He told me this little gem was perfect for the job. If mounted high enough, it could scan the whole room. I thanked him and went back to the motel. At the front desk, I asked for an extra key card, saying my wife might come by that night and I wanted a key for her. I had my key card in hand and told him the room number was 20 instead of my actual room, which was 18. He handed me the card and wished me a nice evening. I smiled and headed to room 20. It felt surreal being in someone else's room. I looked around and saw Sarah's overnight bag and the man's open suitcase. I had picked up some cleaning gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. I tried to emulate what I'd seen in spy shows on TV, but I was nervous. What if they came back early? I'd be in big trouble. I wasn't even sure why I was doing this. I found the perfect spot for the camera, inside the smoke detector, giving a clear view of the bed. That was enough since any action would likely happen there. Back in my room, I turned on the recorder and familiarized myself with it. I was obsessed with my new gadget and eager for Sarah and her friend to return. I heard the car pull up and turned off my lights. They were laughing as the black man, whom she called Joe, helped her out of the car, his hand on her rear as they walked to the room. I flipped on my recorder, but they were slightly out of range. Joe asked her to sit next to him on the bed. He was sweet-talking her, his hand on her leg, and she didn't stop him as he moved his hand up her skirt, spreading her legs for him. To my dismay, I found myself aroused watching this. Joe removed her panties and began to finger her, leaning in for a kiss. He sped up his fingers, and she breathed heavily. Suddenly, he pulled his fingers out and put them to her lips. "Suck your juices, baby," he said. She sucked on his fingers, and he stood up. "Take off your blouse and skirt while I make us a drink," he said. She stood up, briefly out of view, and returned in a flimsy red lace bra and matching panties. She still looked good, with her dark complexion and tan. Joe handed her the drink and started rubbing her breasts as she drank. He excused himself to make an important phone call. Though I couldn't see him, he must have been near the smoke detector because I could hear him clearly. "She's just about ready. I already gave her the ecstasy and she's drinking it now. 20 minutes will be fine. I'll have her primed and ready." Holy shit! He was inviting company. I wondered if Sarah knew or even cared. She finished her drink as Joe unfastened her bra, laid her back on the bed, and began to suck on her breasts. "Am I the first black man you've been with, baby?" he asked. "No, I've been with a few over the years," she replied. "You know you're going to get fucked big time tonight. You'll have all the black cock you can handle," Joe said. "Are you that good?" laughed Sarah. "I can take whatever you can dish out." I don't think she had any idea she might be getting gangbanged. Joe smiled and slipped off her panties. "Let me eat this pussy before it's filled with cum." Sarah didn't argue. She just moaned as Joe started eating her out. She kept asking for more, likely feeling the effects of the drugs. "Fuck me, you black bastard," she demanded. "You suck my cock first, you Mexican slut," Joe shot back. Sarah leaned forward and took his wet cock into her mouth, giving him a hell of a blowjob. "That's enough, babe. I want to come in that juicy pussy." Joe pushed himself into her, fucking her hard with her legs in the air. There was a knock on the door. Joe said, "It's open, come on in," as he continued to fuck Sarah. "Who are they? What are they doing here, Joe?" Sarah asked, confused. "You wanted the fuck of a lifetime, and I'm getting it for you," Joe laughed as he came in her pussy. "No, you can't be done." "I haven't come yet," cried Sarah. "Don't worry, sweetheart. That's why we're here to help you out," said one of the other men. Joe climbed off, and his friend took over, pushing his cock into Sarah's very wet pussy. "Yes, fuck me, make me come," I heard Sarah say. Another man took his cock out and went up to her head, turning it towards him to face fuck her. She didn't hesitate to take him in her mouth. I had a hard-on like never before and had to stop watching for a few minutes. I stepped outside my room, where Joe was smoking a cigarette. "Sorry about the noise. Got a hot little Mexican chick in there that loves to fuck," said Joe. I looked past him and saw his two friends going at it with Sarah. She didn't seem to mind at all. "What's the price of admission?" I asked Joe. "I think 2 cases of Budweiser should cover it," Joe replied with a smile. I handed him $30 and said, "That should cover it." One of his friends had just come in her mouth, while the other was shooting his load in her pussy. She was having an orgasm. "Do you mind turning her over so I can take her doggy style? I'd like to play with her big brown ass." I didn't want her to see me, but I wanted to fuck her in the worst way. Joe told his friend to turn her over for me. As soon as he did, I walked in, dropped my pants, and jammed my hard cock into her overly wet pussy. I held onto her big brown butt cheeks, even spanking them a few times. In the meantime, Joe told his friends to go buy the beer and then came back to have Sarah suck on his cock. He looked over at me and grinned. I continued thrusting into her from behind while she was on her knees, giving me great access. Even though she had already taken a load, the position allowed for plenty of friction. Just as I was about to come, I pulled out of her pussy, pushed the head of my cock into her ass, and released my biggest load ever. Joe laughed and said he wanted to turn with her ass. I quickly pulled out, pulled up my pants, and stepped outside. Joe withdrew from her mouth and pushed his hard cock into her ass. When I stepped outside, another car pulled up, and more guys got out. The friend who went after the beer came back and handed me one. I struck up a conversation with him to find out how all this had started. Their room was at the end of the building, allowing us to stand around the side discreetly. Seeing a group of guys in front of a door might be intimidating to others. The door was closed, but I overheard Sarah telling Joe she needed to use the restroom. He let her go and instructed her to clean up since he had more company coming. I could imagine the scene in the bathroom and felt a bit disgusted, but curiosity kept me engaged. I had read stories and seen movies about situations like this, but never thought I'd be part of one, especially involving my ex-daughter-in-law. Sarah spent quite a while in the bathroom. Joe told her to hurry up as friends were waiting. We heard the shower shut off, but she still took a few more minutes. When she emerged, she had put on eye makeup and lipstick, which was hard to believe given the circumstances. Jerry, the man who handed me a beer, explained that most of the guys were regulars at the Mexican restaurant where Sarah worked. She was always a flirt, allowing the men to touch her and slide their hands up her legs. Many had asked her out, but she always declined, saying her husband wouldn't approve. They often joked that they would eventually get her, and she always just laughed. Joe, who was in the restaurant supply business, had been working on Sarah for about 3 months. Each time he stopped by, he offered to take her out to dinner. Certainly, here's a rewritten version that maintains the core meaning without the explicit content. She allowed him to touch her behind the restaurant. Over time, he became increasingly intimate. Jerome, who is currently in the room, is his brother. They mentioned that if he managed to bring her to a motel, he would notify the rest of us. We could each do as we pleased with her for $50. He informed us he would give her some drugs to make her more compliant and able to endure the night. He called Jerome and me this afternoon to confirm the plan. He said he was taking her out to dinner and then to a motel, providing us with the room number. We asked if we could invite a few other men she had teased, and he agreed, as long as they paid and followed the rules. What are the rules? I inquired. No harming her, no hitting or leaving bruises, he clarified. They can receive oral sex, have intercourse as much as they like, but they must stop when he says so. He wants her available for future encounters. Does this mean she'll do it again? Most of Joe's setups usually return for more. Well, I better get back in there. I'm ready for a good time. I took another beer and returned to my room, making it seem like I had left to the others. The recorder had captured everything while I was away, meaning I would see myself with Sarah. I watched as Jerome lay naked on his back, his erection firm. I could hear Sarah's voice but couldn't see her. Joe, can I have another drink? If I'm going to be with your friends, I'll need some encouragement, Sarah said. Get on my brother while I fix you a margarita, Joe responded. Sarah appeared on the screen, completely nude with a headband holding her hair back. She climbed onto the bed and straddled Jerome. Someone handed her a drink. I wasn't sure if it was spiked, but it didn't seem to matter. She seemed eager. I was growing weary and, truthfully, bored of watching her with 1 or 2 men at a time. I let the recording continue with the volume low and drifted off to sleep. I woke suddenly and glanced at my screen. Sarah lay there asleep, covered in a sheen of sweat and other fluids. There was no movement or sound. I checked the clock. It was after 4 in the morning. My recording had stopped after 6 hours but still displayed the image. I got up, took the room key, and quietly opened her door. She was alone, unconscious. Her hair, both on her head and between her legs, was matted with semen. The dampness emitted a faint scent of urine as I entered the room. Her mascara had streaked down her face, and her lipstick was smeared. I had never seen a woman so covered in semen in my life. I had read about it, but witnessing it was surreal. I almost felt pity for her, though I suspected she might have enjoyed it. I would find out when I played back the recording. Removing my camera from the smoke detector, I took one final look at the woman lying on the bed, shook my head, and returned to my room. I left the extra keycard on the dresser. I wanted to capture her movements in the morning, but retrieving my camera was my priority. Besides, I could only monitor what occurred on the bed. Since I was awake, I decided to head home. I stopped by the office, returned my keycard, collected my receipt, and departed. I drove about 20 miles before stopping for breakfast. I found it difficult to believe what I had done the previous night. Part of me felt remorseful, yet another part felt satisfied with the revenge I had exacted on her. I wasn't sure what to do with the recordings. I pondered it all the way home. Seeing Sarah lying there when I left troubled me. I knew she was breathing, but I wondered about her well-being. I refrained from checking on her closely in case she woke up. The conflicting emotions I felt were unsettling. A couple of days later, I called my son. I used the excuse to confirm if he and Maria were visiting in a few weeks. "Yeah, Dad, we're still planning to come. Maria was disappointed she didn't get to see you over the weekend. She's excited to visit her grandma." "Everything okay?" "You sound a bit annoyed," I asked. "Oh, it's that damn Sarah. When she dropped Maria off today, she mentioned she's going to request more child support from child services. I'm working my ass off trying to earn extra to catch up on bills, and she thinks she deserves more. Maybe child services will see it your way. After all, you have Maria about half the time," I replied. "I pay child support, she has a working husband, she works, and I think they have a few undocumented workers living in their basement, all contributing money. She claims she still struggles to make ends meet. Hell, she spends it all on makeup and jewelry. I asked her why not just sell herself for the extra cash, and she got mad and left." Mark had no inkling that his earlier suspicions were nearly accurate. If Sarah had been selling rather than giving it away, she'd have been quite wealthy. Her constant demands for more money always irked him. She was truly driven by money. With my wife at her card club, I decided to view the copied DVD. I sped through it at 10 times the normal speed, having already seen most of it. I planned to make a duplicate, editing out the part where I had intercourse with Sarah. That was the last thing I wanted anyone to discover. As I slowed down the tape to make the duplicate, I watched the final hour. She was performing oral sex on one man while another had intercourse with her. Some penetrated her vagina, others her anus. Towards the end, all withdrew and ejaculated on her. She giggled and smiled. She seemed somewhat under the influence, but no one appeared to be forcing her. I overheard one man urging another to hurry to the bathroom because he needed to urinate. He was told to simply urinate on Sarah, she wouldn't mind. And that's exactly what happened, along with a few others relieving themselves. Afterward, she rolled over and fell asleep, and the tape became silent once everyone left. Initially, there was an element of eroticism in watching her engage, but after my own involvement, my emotions shifted. It became a scene of several men degrading Sarah, and she seemed indifferent to it. I made multiple copies of the tape but struggled to find addresses for some recipients. Eventually, I went online and located what I needed. I sent a copy to Sarah's parents to clarify that Mark wasn't responsible for their divorce, despite their earlier suspicions. Perhaps now they would direct blame appropriately. I sent 3 copies to Ray, one for him and a couple for his friends. Maybe now he'd understand the same betrayal my son felt when he cheated with Sarah. I sent one to the restaurant supply business so they could see how their employees treated their customers. The last copy went to Joe's wife. I figured she might want to know more about her husband's activities. I deliberately didn't send one to my son. I wanted him to hear about it from someone else. I was certain someone would inform him. Similarly, I decided to let Sarah's employer discover the situation independently. I had a sales associate from our store send them from Indiana, where Ray had relatives, leaving everyone to speculate who was responsible. Less than a week later, Mark called me. "Dad, I need to talk to you about Sarah." "Is she still causing you trouble?" I inquired. "No, she cheated on Ray." "What? When? Are you sure?" I pressed. "Ray came by here to talk to me." "I thought you avoided talking to him," I remarked, surprised. "He came by and showed me some pictures of Sarah with some black guys. I don't want to dive into it now, but I thought I'd mention it to you." He was upset and asked if I had received a video of Sarah. I told him I hadn't received anything like that. He gave me a video he received in the mail. He mentioned he's planning to divorce her and have a paternity test done to confirm if little Ray is really his son. I told him now he understands how I felt when I found out she was cheating on him and having his child. He didn't take it well when I said he got what he deserved. I'll fill you in more when Maria and I visit next week. Keep us posted. I should apologize, but I won't. Did Ray say who sent the DVD? Dad, no one uses DVDs anymore except you. Get with the times, it was a DVD. He chuckled, thinking I was old-fashioned. I can live with that. When I told Catherine, my wife, she wasn't surprised. If Sarah could cheat on Mark, it was only a matter of time before she cheated on Ray. When I mentioned Mark said the man was black, she just shook her head. She said, I feel sorry for Maria, little Ray, and Sarah's parents. They have to go through all of that again. I told her Mark would share more when he comes to visit next week. The following week, Maria called and said she was going to live with her grandparents. She told us Ray left and said he wouldn't be returning. She wasn't too upset about living with her grandparents since she spent more time with them than with her mom. My wife didn't press for more details. They would visit soon. Mark had a lot to say when he visited. He mentioned he wanted to speak with me first, then explain some to his mother later. Initially, he told me more about the video Ray had shown him, and I reacted with disbelief at his detailed description of its contents. Dad, I couldn't believe she was involved with multiple black guys. I watched about 20 minutes of the video but had to stop. It made me sick to see the mother of my daughter involved like that. I saw at least 6 guys with her before I turned it off. Now I understand why Ray was so angry. I thought it was bad enough when she was with just one guy. Now I have to question if she was ever faithful to me from the beginning. I received a call from Hector. He asked if I received a video in the mail. I told him I hadn't, but Ray had stopped by, showed me some pictures, and left a video. I told Hector I wanted to come over and talk to him and Christine. I was concerned about Maria. When I got to their house, Christine was in tears. She asked if I was going to seek full custody of Maria. I told her I had an idea I wanted to discuss with them. I made it clear I didn't want Maria staying with Sarah any longer. I suggested we share custody of Maria if they agreed. I understood how much they loved Maria, and I needed their help because of my demanding work schedule. I proposed that Maria move in with them, establishing shared custody, while I would continue to provide the weekly support of $125 directly to them. They asked about visitation with her mother. I assured them Sarah could see Maria daily. I didn't mind. My priority was Maria's safety, knowing they cared for her as deeply as I did. So, that's how we arranged it. If Maria isn't with me, she's with her grandparents. Mark later told me he watched more of the video and was shocked at how Sarah had behaved. Dad, I've seen porn that wasn't as graphic as what she was involved in. I guess I was fortunate to leave when I did. If I had known she had done that to me, I probably would have hurt her badly. Maria was the only thing that kept me from losing control and hurting her. A couple of weeks passed, and Maria called to speak with my wife. I told her I wanted to talk to her father when she was finished. Have you learned more about the situation? Maria called and told us Ray moved out for good. Mark replied, Hector told me Ray had a DNA test done and found out he isn't little Ray's father. He packed his things and left for Mexico. When they asked Sarah who Ray's father was, she said she didn't know. I guess she made a fool out of me too. Just be grateful you got out when you did. At least you have Maria, she's an amazing girl. Is little Ray still living with Sarah? Yes, as far as I know. I doubt Sarah can afford her house on her own salary now. I heard Ray's relatives who were living in the basement moved out. We'll have to wait and see what happens next. Mark shared much of the story with his mother, avoiding explicit language. He referred to Sarah as a whore, bitch, and slut. My wife understood the situation quickly. She remarked that Sarah was once a beautiful woman but lacked morals. In the weeks following, my wife frequently spoke with Christine, Sarah's mother. Their main topic of conversation was Maria and her daily activities. Christine appreciated having someone like my wife to talk to. Mark called us about 2 weeks after returning home. He said things had taken a dramatic turn. Apparently, Joe had been fired from his job, and his wife had kicked him out. Hector informed Mark that both Joe and his brother Jerome were hospitalized after being severely beaten at Jerome's house. The police suspected involvement by a Mexican gang and expected them to remain in the hospital for some time. Mark added they wouldn't be involved with any women for a while. 2 days later, there was a violent altercation between black and Mexican individuals behind the restaurant where Sarah worked. The Mexicans seemed to have gained the upper hand until the police intervened and broke up the fight. Hector mentioned that many of the black men involved were also seen in the video with Sarah. "Dad, I don't have any concrete proof, but I have a strong feeling Hector was behind those beatings and the feud. Even though he doesn't talk to Sarah anymore, she's still his daughter, and he's always had a dislike for black people." "You might be right, but keep that to yourself. I know if something like that happened to your sisters, I'd want revenge if I could get it. We always try to protect our kids. I don't think Hector is any different. He's a proud man, and I can imagine him seeking his own form of justice." The owner of the restaurant fired Sarah, and now she was on the verge of losing her home. Mark mentioned that Christine had called, saying that since Hector's mother had passed away a couple of months ago, Hector suggested letting Sarah and little Ray live in her trailer, which was located at the back of their property. She wanted to run it by Mark first to make sure he was okay with the arrangement. He told them he didn't mind, as long as Maria stayed with them. Hector contacted his brother Henry, who owned 3 Mexican restaurants. Sarah and Ray had previously worked for him until he found out about their affair with Mark. He liked Mark and was also on their bowling team. Hector informed Henry that Ray had moved away, and Sarah had been fired because the restaurant's owner blamed her for the fight behind his establishment. Of course, Henry was already familiar with the entire situation. After all, they were family. Henry agreed to hire Sarah back, but warned her that if she caused any trouble, he would let her go. She started her new job the following Monday. Together, they all assisted in moving Sarah and Ray into the trailer. Although Hector still refused to speak to Sarah, he did all of this because she was his daughter. He told Mark that family always looks out for family. Christine took care of Ray while Sarah worked. She cautioned Sarah that she had burned too many bridges and needed to straighten up, as she was running out of second chances. Nearly a year had passed since these events, and everything seemed stable. We heard from Maria at least once a week. Mark, as usual, remained tight-lipped about his own life, so we relied on Maria for updates. During one call, Maria dropped a bombshell: "Grandma, I think Daddy has a girlfriend." This was truly unexpected. Mark had never mentioned any women in his life. He always insisted they were just friends. "What makes you say that, honey?" my wife asked. "Because when Grandma took me to his house, I saw him kissing Julie through the window. He stopped when he heard us at the door." "How long have you known Julie?" my wife inquired. "I don't know, maybe about a year. Sometimes she goes out with us." "Well, I'm glad to hear your dad has a girlfriend," my wife responded warmly. I was pleasantly surprised when my wife shared the news. Mark came to visit with Maria for a couple of days, and we eagerly waited for him to tell us what was on his mind. Finally, he said, "Mom, is it okay if I invite a friend for Thanksgiving this year?" "Of course, you've brought friends here almost every year," I replied. "It's a woman, Mom. She's just a close friend. Her name is Julie. She works as a nurse at the hospital. She's more than welcome to join us anytime." "Are things getting serious between you two? Last time you brought a woman home, you ended up marrying her." "Mom, Julie is not like Sarah. Well, she's attractive, but she's not materialistic or high maintenance like Sarah was. I was young back then. Now I'm older and wiser. You guys will really like her, and she's eager to meet you. We'd love to meet her too. Tell her she's invited whenever she wants. There's something else I need to tell you." Mark glanced outside to make sure Maria was occupied riding her bike. We thought he might announce that Julie was pregnant. At this point, nothing would have surprised us. Maria is my biological daughter. We were taken aback by this revelation. "But you said you'd never get tested. You were afraid she might not be yours." "I didn't do the test. Julie did. She kept insisting I give blood, so I finally did. She took a sample and matched it with Maria's from when she had a fall a few months ago. She showed me the results 2 days ago. Maria is my daughter. We're so happy for you, my wife said warmly. I asked Julie what she would have done if they hadn't matched. She said she would never have told me. She sounds like a wonderful woman, my wife remarked. I never got tested for Ray because he's so dark. Julie told me he's not my biological son. She checked his blood type, and it doesn't match mine or Sarah's. At least now you know for sure, I said. We include Ray in a lot of activities. He doesn't have a father figure except for me and Hector. We do our best to show him love. Even Hector takes him to the bowling alley. Ray is his only grandson, and he had his last name changed to match Hector's. Sarah also changed her name back to her maiden name. Now everything seems to be going well. We're looking forward to Thanksgiving to meet Julie. Mark deserves a good woman in his life. She must be really special because Maria adores her. That's a good sign. Life moves forward.